When I die, it isn't going to be the shit that I accumulated or the house or the car or the whatever. All that shit is empty and vapid. If anything's important to me, it's like traveling and experiences, and everything else is completely unimportant and decentralized on my list of things to do.
What's up, guys? Super amped. We have the trade show god here, Aaron Levant. I'm not trying to typecast you, but most definitely the trade show god. And let's start right off the bat. You just told us that you were dyslexic and you've never read a book before in your life. So let's start a little bit with the backstory. That must be interesting. Growing up dyslexic. Where were you from? What was the childhood like?
I'm from here in Los Angeles. I grew up in the Valley. I've been here my whole life. Never left.
Where in the Valley?
I grew up in like Sherman Oaks, Studio City area. Yeah.
So I guess let's just skip middle class, upper middle class. What was it like?
Yeah, I mean, my family did well for themselves. My dad was a writer for like television and stuff like that. So I kind of grew up around the entertainment industry. Never really had an itch or an interest to follow my dad's footsteps and kind of like get in the entertainment business, and kind of always went my own path. Yeah.
Being dyslexic and not reading a book, I assume that you probably didn't do that well in school.
I did horrible in school. I think I had two things going against me. I was extremely dyslexic, so, typecast me in the kind of like, learning disabilities, subset of kids. And then I think I was really embarrassed and shy about it. And, they do those things in class where like you go around the room and each kid reads a paragraph, you go to kid, come to me, and it's like the whole class is looking at you and I'm like stuttering and kind of fucking it up. And, it's like extremely embarrassing moments for me. So I think like those type of things made me very, my mom calls it oppositionally defiant. So I started acting like an asshole at school, being mean to teachers, authority figures, right? Just going against the grain to avoid, whatever, really like masking whatever. I didn't really want to engage in the learning stuff. And, so because of this one thing, then I started to act out, and ultimately ended up in me stopped going to school full time in like fourth grade.
Fourth grade,
yeah.
Wow, this guy didn't give him a fuck.
I read
Damn.
I read you got kicked out.
That was later.
Yeah.
When I was in elementary school, I had like one of those episodes where like kids were laughing at me about reading in school, whatever. I went home and I told my parents, like, I'm not going back to school again. There's a little fourth grader, like, standing there telling your parents, like, all right, take a day off, whatever. And ultimately, like, I think it's my first big sale ever. I convinced them to let me do homeschool for the rest of the year. I didn't go back to school for fourth or really fifth. And then we moved to like Calabasas, Agora area when I was 11. I did junior high, and then I got kicked out the second week of 10th grade. I never finished high school, never went to college.
For what? What'd you do?
I think I did everything wrong that you could possibly do. Fighting, getting in trouble at school with disobedient and rude to teachers, got arrested at a school dance for having alcohol in the car. I mean, anything you could possibly do wrong. I was like a shitty graffiti writer in the mid to late 90s. I got arrested a couple times, stuff like that. Just, I was just continue everything I could do wrong. I kind of did wrong around that period of my life.
Isn't there a crazy stat? I know Damon John is dyslexic. Isn't there like a bunch of top CEOs and very successful people that are dyslexic?
I've heard that. I've never read like what the actual kind of like statistic is in terms of like really successful people and a direct correlation between like learning disabilities or being dyslexic. But I've listened to a couple of people's like TED Talks or talking to them informally and like heard them say that, and I've noticed a trend.
Those ads that look like they're spam, or it's like those slideshows in the back of the bottom of Safari? I feel like you're going to be on that list one day, like the most successful dyslexic people. I see that in your near future. Yeah. So let's talk about work. So you had a very interesting path to get to where you were today, and I think a lot of the things that you did in your life directly correlated to finding kind of white space in the market. So what was the first job you had?
First job or first company I started? Just have it in reverse order.
Either or. Let's do it.
When I was would have been in I guess that year that I would have been in fourth grade, I started a magazine at my house called Hot Cars Magazine in like I guess that would have been like early 90s, where I was self-publishing like a magazine or a zine, if you will. I was really into cars. I still am. And I went, and my next door neighbor, this guy named Walter Beck, was an Arby's franchisee, and I actually made my first sale, and I sold him the back cover ad of my self-published magazine, and I was selling the magazine to kids at my school, and that was like my first business or job, if you will. And I was always kind of like doing small things like that. In like 1997, 1998, I was learning to build websites in Dreamweaver, and I published a graffiti website called westcoastgraph.com. I had a correlating t-shirt line that went with it called Society Clothing, where I was selling my t-shirt brand through my content company, right? So it was like, I didn't know what the fuck I was doing, but I was doing like all these
This is a long time ago, Dreamweaver. That's a throwback.
Yeah, I was building websites in Dreamweaver, and then I was attempting to publish like a graffiti DVD series, much in the vein of like you saw there's like motorcycle videos or Jackass or whatever. I was doing like my own kind of like graffiti centric like video series that would be published on DVD, and I was gonna sell through my website, and I was learning how to do all that stuff. So those are my first few like business ventures. The only job I ever kind of had early on was I got an early job working at Warner Brothers Animation on the back lot running packages, and I just literally was delivering packages, and I ended up doing like some light graphic design work there for a production company.
That's cool.
And
What'd you learn there?
Absolutely nothing.
Nothing. You learned that you didn't want to do that.
I learned that it wasn't for me, and I didn't fit in, and I learned a little bit of graphic design stuff. I got to go to lunch with a guy named Chuck Jones. You guys know who Chuck Jones is?
I know.
Chuck Jones is the guy, the illustrator that created like Daffy Duck and like a lot of the Warner Brothers characters. So I got to go to lunch with him a few times, and he's an interesting guy. You know the main character in Jurassic Park who dresses in all white, the guy that owns the park?
Yeah, we'll call it John Hammond, baby.
What's that?
John Hammond.
Yeah, so his outfit.
Jeff is obsessed with Jurassic.
Yeah.
He's got Jurassic
Okay,
Park
so
tattoo.
that his outfit and his whole persona is
I'm gonna
based
step
off
out
the
of this
real.
combo.
Yeah.
It's based off the real life persona of Chuck Jones in real life. So that outfit he wore with the white hat and the
Yeah.
white shirt is exactly Chuck Jones's
It's
outfit.
funny, they showcased it at Comic-Con.
Yeah.
That same exact.
So you got to look up Chuck Jones. So I got to go to lunch with him a couple times. Amazing guy, and he would sit there at lunch at the cafeteria at Warner Brothers at the really nice like cloth table, and you'd be eating, and he'd take out a pen, and start drawing right on the cloth table, and he'd do this every day at lunch. I didn't know this, but it was like a kind of party trick, right? And he'd go, "What's your name, kid?" And he'd draw you something, right, and illustrate you into the thing, and with a Daffy Duck, and at the end of lunch, some waiter would come over with scissors, they cut it out, and he'd hand it to you, and he'd give you like basically an original animation cell at the end
That's
of lunch.
awesome.
So that was like my coolest take.
So it was inspiring. Inspiring.
Inspiring. I got to meet like an
yeah.
amazing creator. Like Chuck Jones is like one of the biggest illustrators,
awesome.
creators of all time. Yeah.
So it seems like early on you kind of got into this art world, and then it kind of tied into streetwear. What was like your first taste into streetwear? Because that's how I first heard of you. You know, creating the streetwear trade show called Agenda, which for people not watching was the biggest streetwear trade show of all time. So how'd you get into streetwear?
So as I kind of mentioned, I had started my own kind of like streetwear brand called Society Clothing, like late 90s, and I was an aspiring graphic designer. My real passion was really design and graffiti, and I was trying to figure out how I could make a living off of being interested in graffiti. I wasn't a good enough graffiti writer where I was going to make a living off of it. I was a decent graphic designer. I could do some web, and I was doing motion graphics in After Effects, and I was like kind of learning computer stuff. And I noticed a lot of my favorite graffiti writers were all working at this company called GAT, which was an early LA streetwear brand, started in '89, kind of same year. Fresh Jive started, GAT started, X Large, all those companies kind of came out of LA around the same time frame. So this guy, Louis Polito, was the founder of GAT in '89. All my favorite graffiti writers were ultimately the guys who became the Seventh Letter, if you know them, all worked there as graphic designers in the kind of late '80s through all the way through like early 2000s. So through actually Tall, who you know, I got introduced to Louis Polito just to meet him, and they needed help at a trade show. So kind of a couple things happened at once. I got into the trade show business, or into the streetwear industry, and learned about the trade show business all kind of one swoop. So introduction to Louis to help him because he needed some kids just to come help him out at a trade show.
So you had no business getting an introduction. It just was a friend hooking you up.
He just said, hey, like this guy needs help like setting up a trade show booth. So like I was me and a couple friends in Tall were like, hey, we'll go down to this show like ASR, which was like the predecessor to Agenda, say, hey, like 1 week and come help us set up walls and pass out flyers and do whatever. And I showed up, and it was like, the company I was working with, I was super intrigued with because all my favorite graffiti writers worked there and got to meet them and talk to them. And then just the show, like this was pre-blog, pre-social, so it's like the internet in real life. All my favorite companies, all my favorite, just things that were happening you see in like magazines were there in real life, and I was like totally blown away and taking it in. And then I got to do the same thing the next weekend with this guy Louis. He took me to the Magic trade show in Vegas. So I kept helping him out, and basically through the series of helping him out, he just goes like, hey kid, like, what's your deal? What do you do? Where are you from? Blah, blah, blah. Get to talking to him, and I tell him, hey, I don't go to school. I've already been kicked out at this point. I was just kind of kicking around, doing graffiti, being a juvenile delinquent, and he's like, hey, why don't you come intern for me? So basically this guy Louis offered me an opportunity to come and intern for him. He said, like, come in Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You come in at like 10 a.m. and leave at 3 p.m. I basically showed up at like 9 a.m. that first Monday, and didn't leave for 5 years. And basically my first job working for Louis was like sorting his magazine collection and like going to pick up packages and whatever, like really mundane stuff. And I just kept sticking around, and I literally just like every chance I got was absorbing. And then like one of the graphic designers had quit one day, and I was like, hey, can I jump in and fill in until you find someone? Like I was not even getting paid at this point. And I just jumped in and just started like assisting graphic design. And then eventually I became a junior graphic designer. Then I became the head graphic designer. Then I started working on sales. Then I started working on marketing. And it's like, and I'm kind of abbreviating a lot here, but basically like this guy opened the door for me, and I just like took that opportunity, and like just like everything else in my life went away, right?
Yeah.
I just did nothing but this for the next 5 years, learned everything I could about the clothing business, about the streetwear business. Actually,
Trade show as well.
so we were going to a lot of trade shows, right?
Mhm.
I had gone to those original trade shows, and then we were running this brand, which is called GAT, and we were going to a lot of trade shows. Then GAT was kind of slowing down, and Louis and I had launched a couple new brands, and he gave me the opportunity to partner with him in 2 new brands. One was my brand, which is called Matador, which is like a surf skate brand, and it had a cool theme. The theme of the brand would self-destruct every 4 years, because basically the theme is all your favorite brands, you grow to love them, and then they betray you by selling out.
Yep.
So we're just going to shut down our brand every 4 years and start from scratch. That was like the theme of our brand.
I love that. That's a great concept.
It's a great concept. We had another brand called Green Apple Tree, which actually, I don't know if you guys ever saw that brand. It got pretty successful. We basically reformatted GAT, G-A-T, Green Apple Tree. It was like the beginning of what I thought was like a lifestyle, kind of like contemporary streetwear brand, kind of at the same time that like Ruka came out and Green Apple Tree, they launched in the same year. They had this kind of like more earthy design, art-driven aesthetic, but they weren't like very hard street. So that brand got pretty big. But basically, through owning and operating and running these brands, we were going to a lot of trade shows. Trade shows were expensive. We basically spent a lot of money to go to this big corporate show like ASR Magic, get shoved in the corner. The people running the show were not culturally relevant. They didn't understand nuance or curation or who was on the come up, and there wasn't this value on like cool and small, like niche brands at this point that had like clout or authenticity. They're just like, who has the biggest checkbook? And we did not. So that inherently was the problem. I then went to New York to attend the show called TBC, To Be Confirmed. It was these guys from London, opened a small show in New York, and it was essentially this. They rented a loft in Chelsea, and they just put up some rolling racks and had a cool DJ, and it was super minimal and like very stark. And I was like, this is fucking genius. Like,
This is cool. It had a little bit of a lifestyle element.
but
to
it felt cool and minimal, and it was really just simple and clean, and it was all even playing field. Like you paid one price, no one had a big booth, no one had anything. It was just like, it was about the product. It was, you had a rolling rack and the product. And I was like, this is a great format. I'm like, why is no one doing this like, in California or wherever? And as I started to think about it, I really started to obsess on this idea. Now around that time, me and Louis, if I'm going too in depth here, but
No.
Keep going.
while I was the kid cleaning Louis' warehouse and sorting his magazine collection, I found a flyer in his warehouse from 89. And it was this flyer. It said Agenda, Art, Music, Beer. And it was like this weird, you guys know what a flocking is? A flocking print? It's like this like fuzz print. It's like this old printing process. So I brought this to Louis. I said, what is this flyer? And he's like, 10 years ago, we used to do parties in the back of our warehouse where we'd like put up an art show and invite local DJs over, and people would come. I'm like, this is rad. I'm like, we should do this again. So around this time, me and Louis would just throwing these warehouse shows called Agenda, Art, Music, Beer, where we'd invite local artists, we'd have cool DJs, and it was just a promotional event for our company. But it wasn't really having any purpose, just fun. So we were already had a couple of these under our belt while this was going on.
Profitable or more break even for marketing?
It wasn't anything. It didn't cost us anything. We just put it in our warehouse. We invited friends over, hung art. We invited, I maybe spent $600 on a DJ, got some beer donated, and that was it. It was just like hundreds of people would show up. So that was the original inception of Agenda. There was 10 years before me. Then I brought it back again as the same concept with him as a partner. And then I saw this opportunity to say, hey, why don't we do this version of these like kind of minimal shows in California against the ASR show, right? At the same time. There's all these people in town. Let's get all of our like-minded friends together. Let's just rent a space across the street and then like put all our friends who don't really identify with this big corporate Volcom Hurley bullshit across the street, right? And so I had this conversation with my mom. I'm like, I'm thinking about doing this, what do you think? She's like, just fucking do it, right? So then I went to ASR in September of 2002. I told all my neighbors we were exhibiting about this, right? About this idea. I said an idea. I'm like, hey guys, next time, I'm like, you guys come with me. You guys
Acquiring customers at the competitor's event.
just talking to my friends, right? And these brands, like, brands aren't even in business anymore. Went through the list of like brands that were at the first agenda, and like out of 30, like 29 are out of business, right? Started talking to people, and everyone's like, yeah, I'm in. So I then went and spent the next 6 months. I rented a Thai restaurant across the street from ASR show in the following January 2003. I was 19 years old, and they got 30 brands to come in. They paid $500 per rack. I basically stole a mailing list from some sales rep who had a mailing list for some big skateboard footwear company. I had 3,500 accounts on it, like every account in Southern California. I had some mailing lists of my own. And basically me and Louis decided that we were going to take the name of this warehouse party we had, take off the word beer, insert the word fashion, and we're going to start this trade show company, Agenda Art Music Fashion. And we launched the first Agenda show with 30 brands and 250 buyers in January of 2003. And it just kind of worked.
That's where that permission forgiveness quote comes from, huh? You just went and took it. Fuck it.
I didn't know what the fuck I was doing, right? And if I talk a lot about usually the businesses I enter, if I knew a lot about them when I entered them, I probably wouldn't have done it, right? Like if someone came to you right now and was like, hey, you want to do affordable digital art for the home or whatever, like you've learned all these things that institutionalize you to make you scared about doing it, like all the hurdles and the cost structures and whatever. Like, so by not knowing anything, I just kind of went for it. And I didn't know about events or trade shows or anything, right? So I did it. It kind of worked. Fred Siegel came to the first one. Bloomingdale's, Beams and Ships from Japan, all these great buyers, press, got all these great articles. And I was like, fuck, this kind of worked, right? But at this point, I wasn't doing it to make money. We just didn't want to pay the other show $5,000. So it was like, hey, how do we get it for free? All our other friends will kind of help us pay the cost structure. And it's just a cool thing to do. So 30 brands, January 2003. Did it again, September 2003, 50 brands. The price went from $500 to $700. Did it again, 70 brands, $800. Kept raising the price a little bit. The show kept growing, iteratively every 6 months. And then I finally stepped back and said, wow, I think this show can be bigger than the brands that I was working on. And at that point, me and Louis were kind of spending time on different stuff, and we had kind of an agreement. I owned like 15% of the apparel business with him, and he owned 50-50 with me in the trade show, and we decided to swap. So I gave my 15% back, he gave me my 50% back, and we walked off in the sunset, and I went to go focus on the trade show full time.
That man definitely regrets that deal.
Well, so it's funny you say that. So for the next 5 years, the trade show went on to make basically no money. At that time, Green Apple Tree and Louis Brands...
No money, but were the metrics going up as far as participants?
It was growing, but it was very hard. And I was still living in my parents' house. I wasn't making really any money. And the brand that I then just forwent my equity in, that I basically spent the last 5 years building my skill set in...
They were making a little bit of money, huh?
They ended up making like $8 or $14 million a year. Like, they started to get big. And I was like, for Nate, I was like, fuck. I for a long time, I felt like I had made the wrong swap. Right?
Guys, this story is just beginning. Those numbers are... We're going to crush those numbers.
Yeah. So I really was sitting around like kicking myself for a while. And
give some context. So you're 5 years in, you didn't make money. How old were you then?
I started Agenda when I was...
You said
19.
Yeah.
So
you're mid-20s.
24, yeah. And not making money. We would grow, but then we'd think we'd lose a venue. We had all these obstacles in our way, right? Mm-hmm. Like, as much as it would seem like it was growing, a lot of adversity would come at us operationally, finance, sales, just like that kind of overused statement. Whatever can go wrong will go wrong. We experienced for the next 5 years.
What was one big issue you remember in those early years? One big problem?
It's bad enough when you're in a business where just like the own gravity of the universe is trying to stop you from succeeding. But when you have actual competitors intentionally trying to prevent you from succeeding, like that happened to me. So like at first the ASR people were like, they didn't even know who we are, right? Yeah. And then once we're a little blip on the radar, I try to talk to them and say, hey guys, can we work together, collaborate? And they're like, shoe off, kid. Like, who are you, right? And then we got a little bit bigger, like show 3, show 4, they're like, oh, this is a problem. So they literally called the fire marshal. This shit I didn't know. And they're like, hey, go over. These guys were doing an illegal event down the street. I didn't know what a special event permit was, or an evacuation plan, or a fire easement, all these things just you would know about running an event. I didn't know. So the fire marshal shows up and is like, hey, we're shutting your event down on the morning of the first day of the show, on like the third show, right? And I'm like, what do you mean you're shutting the event down? He's like, yeah, you're going to close this whole thing up right now. So I'm like, and the guy's like, I'm about to cry, and the guy's like, hey, you know what? I see you're a fucking kid. Come with me to the fire department. We'll get you a special event permit. Like this morning, he was nice about it, but like we had people like literally trying to like shut our business down and like basically like drop a dime on us, like everything we were doing. And then I had to like become experienced and learn how to do the thing properly. So like that on top of whatever headwinds you get at a business, like actual people throwing like, nails under your car.
How important do you think just experience is in entrepreneurship? Because for us, we live in this new world where there's, the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world, early 20s makes billions of dollars.
Yeah.
And for us, I mean, me and Jeff were late 20s and I was about 30 years old when we first started seeing a little bit of success. It seems like you learned everything on the job. Like, how important do you think experience is right now?
I always side on, for myself, and I can't speak for everyone, and this is agnostic of like doctors and lawyers and things that you need like a degree or an actual license.
I'm talking about entrepreneurship.
Yeah, like I think it's not important at all because you just need to get out there and do it. And I think it's so much more valuable to learn by doing. And yeah, it may take you longer, but like, I don't know. I don't know too many of these people personally, but like I can guarantee that I've probably been more successful, had more successful exits and achieved more top line revenue and made more employees well off than some dickhead from Harvard Law School or whatever, right? So, I'm not saying there aren't some really smart people out there like that, but I would say the vast majority seeking, college degrees and things like that, I would say like it puts you at a disadvantage, which is time. So like my advantage was I got out there early, I failed on the job, and I learned a lot by doing that. And by the time I figured it all out, I was already up and running full speed and building a relationship and networks of people to work with while other people like getting out of school and then they're trying to start to do that.
Are you going to send your kids to college?
I wouldn't.
You wouldn't?
I absolutely would not.
I want to get them working early.
Yeah, early.
I don't know if you'd send them to high school with the route you
They
went.
might be slanging in fourth grade. They might have a magazine in their bedroom. Okay, so you're mid-20s. These guys are trying to take you out. You're seeing a little bit of success with Agenda. What's next? What's that next? When did you wake up and you're like, wow, I have something?
I always felt that I had something. But like in all kind of like the way that I am trained to think about business now, business now you think about like a burn rate or like there's you've been now institutionalized to think about there's an end point for your business, right? Like if you don't raise this round of financing or you don't get to this point or reach profitability or reach these metrics by X date, then you have to give up. That's the new popularized culture way of thinking about business. I didn't know anything about business. I didn't know about what a raising a round of financing was, or I never raised any money ever in my entire life for any business I've ever been involved with until the last 2 years, right? So everything for me was like, I just go until I die or give up or whatever, right? So with Agenda, I just lived in my parents' house. There's lots of years we didn't make money, and I just kept going. I never thought about an end point.
So you had no burn rate. It was just 1099s, and people. There was obviously costs associated with the show, but you weren't burning.
In the beginning, it was me and my cousin and like one employee, and like we'd make enough money to pay everyone. Some years, if we didn't, I just put a little money in that I made savings. So I was living at my parents' house or whatever, and we just kept going, but there was no idea of like, oh, if we don't make it by this date, we stop. So we felt like we had something, but on paper, actually, we did not, right? Like in all conventional wisdom, we were failing. So just kept going through that until eventually it just kind of started to work. And then, unfortunately, as it kind of started to work, we actually hit our worst obstacle, and the whole thing was about to fall off of a cliff. And we actually almost went out of business. Like 1 year before we became our most successful, we were actually contemplating closing up shop.
What happened?
So going back to the headwind from competitors. So our whole business model was predicated on doing a show that was curated for street culture or youth culture or whatever you want to call it, across from the big skate surf show, right? And basically those guys were so sophisticated they locked up every venue in town. So our business was based off proximity. We were like a parasite. There was like this big animal and we were the sucker fish floating around on the shark, right? And like, we were siphoning off energy from them. And even though we got big, they were still the big fish, right? That we needed to sustain our ecosystem.
Was this in Vegas though?
This was all in Long Beach, San Diego, California. So what happened was they got so smart that they started to lock up every venue in town, started to lock us out. And we had one venue we had the contract on. And basically my cousin, who was my partner at the time, 1 year, forgot to sign the contract extension for our venue. And then it was like on his desk, and within the week he didn't sign it. They were like so on top of it. They called the venue under a fake name and booked our dates. They changed their dates, and before we had a chance to then follow it, the other competitor stole our dates. And there was nowhere in the entire city to do our show. And we depended on somewhat close proximity. Like people could come into town and attend these 2 events. They locked us out of the entire city of San Diego, legitimately, legally, business checkmate. And we're like, what do we do, right? We're like, we're not big enough now, we can do a show without them. And basically because of that, we're like, fuck, we're screwed. Like, what do we do, right? So while we were actually contemplating on like giving up, I was introduced to the guys at Hurley and Nike around this time, and I met them. They didn't know what was going on like with our kind of situation, but they knew our show was kind of burgeoning and growing and building culture. And I met this guy Roger Wyatt and Paul Gomez. Roger Wyatt was the CEO of Nike Action Sports. He ran Nike SB and Hurley, and then Paul Gomez was the CMO of Hurley. And basically they took a liking to me. They loved the idea, they loved the authenticity, and they said, hey, why don't you guys work with us? Because the very next year, Hurley was going to become the Nike and Hurley become the title sponsor of the U.S. Open of Surfing in Huntington Beach. It's the biggest action sports event in the world, 800,000 attendees. And they said, next year, we're buying the title sponsorship for the next 3 years. They go, why don't you leave San Diego and come with us, and we'll pull all of our brands out of ASR and come put them with you, and you guys will do an agenda trade show in the middle of the biggest action sports consumer festival in the world. And I said, yeah, sign me up.
Yeah.
Right? And we did that, and we moved our whole show, took a gamble, and went to Huntington Beach only with Hurley and Nike committed to do it. And by making that move and risking leaving what was like basically our water source, right, like our energy source, and going over here and trying something completely new, every single brand who told us no for 10 years came with us, including our current customers and all the people I've been calling on, like I called Vans every day for like 10 years. They wouldn't even return the call, right? This is one guy at Vans named Bob Provost, who's the trade show manager. He has a voicemail that he redoes every single day differently. And at the end he says, have a fantastic day. Like, he's really funny. But like, I called this guy and left him a message like every day for like literally 6 years. Finally, this guy calls back, right? So like, as we made this move, and it's kind of a judo move, not only did we sustain the company, but then we actually grew 1,000% in 1 year. And ASR went out of business the following year after we made this move. So we were on the verge of going under, but then like this move, so it was like, but one
power move. I love that shit.
One chance meeting with these guys and making the decision to roll the dice and take this risk, and then the power kind of dynamic that change all basically totally changed the course of our company.
So what was it though that they took that big risk? Obviously you said they liked the authenticity, but like what was it to you that, I mean, that's a big risk to like pull all the brands out and
for
bet
us
on
or
you
for them?
guys?
For them.
Yeah, for them. Like how come they put their
Some
trust
people,
in
like
you?
Roger Wyatt is one of those people that I'll put on my list of mentors, and he's just a smart guy that sees around corners, and like, you need those people in your life. They meet you, they take a chance on you. I met this guy Louis Polito, it gave me a chance. Boom! I met this guy Roger Wyatt, gave me a chance. Like throughout my entire career,
you.
the most I don't know about me, but the most valuable thing I've ever seen this happen is like those times where you level up.
Yeah.
Is always like you meet someone and they either understand you or they understand your idea or both, and they say, yeah, let's fuck it, let's do it, right? Like the people that have that type of, like see around corners type of like wisdom, right, are the ones that like not only help me, but like, those are clearly successful people in business, right? And like that's the most important thing. It wasn't like my strategy was so great or our business plan or whatever. It's like a chance encounter and like conveying your passion to someone and them reciprocating and giving you the opportunity to do something together is everything. In at least my career, I can't speak for everyone else, but like I never would have kept getting there without these people who decided to open the door.
I love that.
The gatekeepers, if you will, decide to open the door.
You were shooting your shot there. You're saying you were calling this Vans guy every single day. Savage. I love it.
No one will call back.
I love it.
As much as I want to consider myself a graphic designer by trade, unfortunately, I think I picked up the scale of being a salesman. Probably as the number one thing that I spent most of my career doing is selling. You got to be selling. No matter what your like core craft or skill is, like, you got to be fucking selling yourself, selling your idea. Like I'm pushing all the time.
I want to talk about that because the one thing I see with you is I always say to become a successful owner or CEO of a company, you have to wear a lot of hats. You have to become a generalist before you become a specialist.
Yep.
And it seems like you were doing everything. You were running the errands, you were doing the graphic design, you were doing the sales, you're working under the CEO. How important is it for entrepreneurs to basically have a basic understanding of every bucket in the business?
I think it's super important. I think I had a pretty wide skill set that I sharpened over the years. Like started off to whatever, graphic design, and all the way learning from like apparel manufacturing to marketing. I picked up these things, but also knowing the things that you don't know, which for me was like finance, right? Like I'm not a guy that's ever logged into QuickBooks every once in my life, right? So finding those other people that can be the yin to your yang and like meld with you. So like I'll own whatever, there's 10 things you got to do in a business, I'll own up to 7 or 8 of those things, right? I still need someone to do those other 2 things really well and like check me, because like I'm already, now that I think I'm doing the design and the marketing and the sales, I'm doing a lot, and then I get like overzealous for those things. You need someone who's reel you back in and like really be watching like the finance. So, but I think
self-aware man right here. I love it.
You need to know all of those things, and like, hey, maybe a technology business could be different where someone's like super focused on like coding or whatever. But I think in like general entrepreneurship, being well-rounded and like being willing to try every hat and have an understanding of every layer of the business is super important if you're going to lead.
Facts. So 1,000% you grew big that year. Tell us, what's that next phase? I think when we started going was 2013-ish. What was big? What was that big moment? Like, what was the big brand that
2009 was when it just got big. It's when everyone came over. Like literally 1,000% growth. Every brand. So I did that first show in Huntington Beach in July of 2009. In January of 2010, ASR put out a press release, said they're calling it quits after 37 years in business.
Do you remember that day?
Yeah, it's fucking wild. It's like, it's like that, like, throw water on me. Am I dreaming? You know what I mean? Like, that's crazy. So, like, your head-to-head Coke Pepsi competition just, like, literally sends a press release. Yeah, we're folding up shop.
I love
like,
it.
you can't even believe that. So then it was already growing at 1,000%, and then everyone came.
You just went in fucking attack mode because you knew it was yours to take them.
I didn't even go in attack mode. We went in goalie mode. Like, instead of outgoing and, like, trying to sell people, we're like, everyone came to us. We're like, oh, we want you, we don't want you. We're just picking who we want, right? And the business just exploded. Then we took it from 2 shows in California. We launched 2 more shows in New York. Then I launched a show in Vegas. We just started expanding, like really big globally. We did a license in Japan. We were just going everywhere.
And at this point, you're getting the big brands like the Nikes of the world, but you're also getting like the Hundreds, the Diamond Supplies,
Crooks and Castles,
all of those streetwear brands.
Yeah, and we successfully blended like corporate, mass market with indie, cool, up and coming people, on the burgeoning of success and everything in between.
What was like the best moment of Agenda and then the darkest moment of Agenda during these times when it got big? So after 2009.
Yeah. It was really great from 2009. I don't know that we had any particular best moment. For me, when we launched, I was, for better or for worse, I have business ADD and I have to keep like going like this because I don't know if I get bored, but like I have to keep latching things on. Sometimes it's a bad idea, sometimes it's a good idea. In about 2012, we latched on a conference, like our version of like a TED Talk around like creativity and entrepreneurialism called Agenda Emerge.
Yeah.
That was my favorite moment, was like the other person that's been like the gatekeeper and my mentor has been like Mark Echo.
Like Tinker, I know Tinker did
Tinker
some
spoke,
stuff. Yeah.
Shepard Fairey spoke, Mark Echo spoke.
And these guys are the goats of
Yeah, guys
Mark
that I
Echo's,
look up to, and like
I got his book right there, Echo. Savage.
we launched the book at the event.
Wow.
But like that to me was the personal highest pride moment for me, where like it was all kids in the audience who want to get in the industry. We're providing this educational platform that's all within shit that I'm interested in, and like that to me was my personal high point. The lowest point, there's so many, like when we were about to go out of business, but that's earlier.
Yeah.
As we got more successful, I think it's when I realized like, this whatever, like what goes up must come down. When I saw we hit the peak, and then like it's inevitable, you hit a certain point. There's a few exceptions to the rule, Disney, Nike, whatever, but most businesses have a peak, and then and they have the falling action, right? Like when I saw that the energy was slowing, that was kind of like frustrating for me, because you're coming off this personal high and this business high, and then it's like, oh, Nike calls you, like, we're dropping out of Agenda.
But
right?
then you did the thing where you did every 4 years you change it, then you changed it,
Well, I pivoted the business, right?
Yeah.
But for the Agenda brand, when I saw we had maxed out on the energy, like we murdered it for a long time, for like from 2009 to 2015,
14, 15?
15, even 16, it was continual growth. 17, 18, it started to dip. Yeah.
The craziest thing about it is, so you're coming from the ownership side. I'm coming from someone that we were on the brand side.
Yeah.
And I remember I was thinking in my head how fucking brilliant it was. I felt the energy fading.
Yeah.
And then next thing I knew, Aaron Levant sells the trade show. And I'm like, this guy sees brick and mortar going down. He sees D2C going up, and people were just wandering eyes. They were figuring out other things. So was that something that you just saw around the corner, that this was, the energy was fading, and you saw what, D2C was coming? Is that what you saw?
We saw in 1 year, PacSun filed for bankruptcy, Active filed for bankruptcy, Karmaloop filed for bankruptcy, like all of the biggest customers that were driving the industry filed for bankruptcy within literally a 1 to 2 year period. That was a big sign writing on the wall. Whether brands were directly affected by those bankruptcies or mentally paralyzed by those bankruptcies, people started to contract their budgets. And just like in general hype, take away any business, real like numbers, just like people, you get too hype and people just go away from you, right? Like you reach peak hype. So I think we did all of those things. There was a business contraction and we reached peak hype. I saw it slowing. When I went to sell the business, the people I decided to sell it to were the guys that own Comic-Con.
Let's take a step back for a second.
Yeah.
So you decided that you wanted to sell the business, you packaged up the P&L, the income statement, and then you went and sought out buyers?
Yeah, I hired an investment bank, went through a traditional process in the sense where like put out call it a book, right? We spent 6 months making like this very detailed financial book, and then we sent it out to, let's say, 50 prospective buyers, narrowed the field down to like 10 or 15 you have conversations with, 5 or 6 you have management meetings with, where they come in, they meet the team, you talk about, they try to basically prod you on the strategy and the growth and the defensibility of the business. And then all those people submit offers, and then you decide whose offers you want to take. Then you narrow down like 2 or 3 in an exclusive process, and then you ultimately decide like who you want to sell the business to. And I went through that whole process over the course of like a year and a half.
Biggest learning lesson in that process? That must have been...
Yeah, what's your biggest advice on exiting a company like that?
Number one is, if you have something, a real profitable business, in this day and age, business don't have to be profitable. I think we're going back to the era post-WeWork where you have to be profitable for people to invest in it or buy it. But in that time, I never thought you could sell a non-profitable business. We had a 70% gross margin, right? We had a great business that was growing, and still had a lot of other extensions and growth ideas. And it's to have the, I guess, lack of ego to say like, hey, I think I've taken this as far as I can take it, so I need to sell it. That's number one. Most people never get there. Even Mark Ecko in his book, he talks about Tommy Hilfiger offered him $500 million for the company. He said no. Ooh. Next year they sold the company out of bankruptcy for $20 million, right? Like, oh God, you gotta see that cliff coming. So like, be able to see the cliff, make the decision, and don't let your ego or like this, like, oh, I think next year I'll do double. I definitely could have waited 1 more year and gotten a higher price for Agenda, but like there could have been anything, a natural disaster, a 9/11, like all these things out of my control. So the time was right. And so to make the decision to do it is 90% of the battle. And then after that, I didn't know anything about the process, hiring an investment bank, talking to the brands. I just kind of did it on site. And what I maybe learned is like, you gotta go with the people who, ultimately, if you're selling a business and you're most businesses, you're going to have to stay in for some type of earn-out period. They're not just going to release you, right? The management team has to stay with the business for X amount of years to get your full value out of it. So they'll give you some money up front and some money on the back end based on performance of the next few years. So you have to stay in and work with these new people. So ultimately, the decision wasn't about who was going to cut the biggest check, who do I want to live the next 3 to 5 years of my life with. And I think we made that decision very well, that the guys who we sold it to were great people, and I felt really good about working with them on a day-to-day basis. And maybe I could have made $1 or $2 million with someone else and been fucking miserable. But like, that was the biggest choice, is like going with people you can live with. Cause like different styles and ideology on business and what the results are could literally drive you
Especially insane. When you're running the show, now you have to answer to someone.
Yeah. And how are they going to let you continue doing what you're doing? Like, you got here by doing what you were doing. And if they're going to come in and say, oh, we're going to do it our way. Not only is that miserable, but they may actually drive it off the tracks. You may not got the rest. You may not actually receive the rest of the money, so all these nuance that can happen, and making sure you have people you can listen to, and they can listen to you, and you can have a real partnership, regardless of who has control. Control is an idea on paper, and whatever it is, the CEO of the company that bought us always said, like, if we're pulling the contract out of the drawer every week, he goes, we already failed, right? So it's like the contract says what it says. It's all about how do we work together in practice.
I like that. So what did you sell? Day and year, where are we at?
I sold the first wave of the company in 2013. So actually earlier than the peak, right? So, but I could have probably held on for 2 more years to get the peak. The peak revenue, I think, was 2014. So probably 2 years or a year too early. And I stayed on for either a 3 or a 5 year earnout. I stayed all 5 years because I loved the business. And I still had profit participation, still had a piece of it, still had the payment on the back end. And what I was really interested in is I operated the company with my cousin completely independently from 2003 to 2013, 10 years exactly, we never raised a dollar, never took out a loan, no money from family, never a line of credit, nothing. It was completely self-financed. So there was a limitation in every risk. Rare.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that was rare because I didn't have an ideology to know there were even other options out there. What happened with that, as the business scaled, like as you build a $10+ million business, all these things, right? Every risk you want to take then, and it's like you're the ones, brunting the risk. There's no distributed risk amongst investors or banks or whatever. This isn't a VC mentality. This is like, it's my family business, right? So when we sold, the idea was now, okay, if we fail, this isn't me that's going to fail. Like, we've got this new company that's going to take the burden of the majority of this, right? I have no personal downside. I'm not the one to be fronting the losses anymore if it happens. So then we just went crazy, and it was like, hey, how do we expand? How do we launch the conference? How do we go into all these other things? Launch a content channel, bought another trade show company, launched ComplexCon, launched another women's trade show. Like, we went from 4 events that I sold them to 30 events when I left.
So you definitely got more aggressive, clearly.
Very aggressive.
How important is risks in this whole entire game for you?
Everything's a risk. I think you have to have a high appetite and stomach for risk. I can't think of anything I've done that was like no risk, right? Whether it's financial risk, reputational risk, brand risk, whatever, all of it's a risk. Every time you do something, but the greatest things that I've achieved is always when, for lack of a better analogy, stepped outside of your comfort zone. Like, all the things that I've done are extremely uncomfortable, down to like freaking out level, like panic attack uncomfortable, right? So all those best moments have always come right after, like, I was like calling my mom, like, fuck, You can tell my mom is constantly the story of who I lean on for advice.
You can't tell your mom everything that's going on.
She's the one I tell.
Yeah?
Yeah.
My mom bugs out. I don't even tell her anymore. She needs to relax. Yeah. So, Agenda's gone. You sell the company. Tell us about ComplexCon. How'd you get involved with that? Because for me, how I see it was there was Magic, there was Agenda, and now there's ComplexCon. And somehow you just, in this whole entire lineage, your name's tied to everything. So how did ComplexCon come about, and what does that partnership look like?
Mark Echo is, I would say, the closest thing I have to an idol. Most kids growing up who like sports or like Michael Jordan, whatever. I was interested in graffiti and entrepreneurialism. So who's your Michael Jordan? It's Mark Echo, hands down. So I was always obsessed with Mark Echo. I hadn't met him until midway through my career. First time I met him, he was actually really rude to me. I had dinner with him, and he just like was like a one-upper. He knows the story, so I'm not. I'll say this openly. I had dinner with him, and just like he was at the peak of his career, just being kind of arrogant. Dinner was really engaging with me. I was so like, oh my god, I'm having dinner with Mark Echo. He just kind of sunned me, which I thought was interesting. Then I reconnected with him years later when I had the conference. I invited him to the conference. He came and was a keynote speaker at our first conference. Amazing. We started to then rebuild and rekindle our relationship. Over the next couple of years, we started to build a great relationship. And basically, I was having a conversation with him just about working together, whatever. And like, I just kind of threw out this idea like, hey, what if we created like ComplexCon, right? And he's like, that's a good idea. And then we were at this advertising conference here in LA called Think LA, and this other guy named Moksha Fitzgibbons, who actually works with me now at Network, was there. Was the chief revenue officer of Complex for 17 years. I pitched him the idea. He said, great. They said, come in and present the idea to Mark, Moksha, Noah, who's at our Complex, and Rich Antonello, who's the CEO of Complex. So for the next 4 weeks, I put together this pitch deck of basically what I thought ComplexCon could be. Mm-hmm. And I built this deck, and it really articulated every aspect, from the experience to the content to the merchandise, the whole thing. And I went in and I presented it to that crew, which is basically the senior leadership at Complex, in January of 2015. This idea. Everyone at the table was like, great, great, great. And Moksha, sitting on the couch, he's really the one that generates revenue, on his BlackBerry, laying down. We're all here having like this engaged meeting. He's totally being like blasé, wasn't paying attention. Kind of at the end looks over after I give my presentation. He goes, how much money do you think we can make? Like profit. And I go, $1 million. I was trying to think what I thought was a lot. And he's like, looks over at his BlackBerry and he's like, do we really care about making $1 million? And I'm like, what? So luckily the other guys in the room weren't affected. And
again, you're underselling, over delivering, my man.
So we all shook hands. They were excited. And for the next 6 months, we put together the plan of the partnership. So it was my company, which was Reed Exhibitions, who I had my partnership with, who I sold Agenda to. They own every Comic-Con in the world. So they have this core competency of delivering these rich fan experiences. And that's why I sold to them, because I saw the next iteration of my business wasn't going to be more trade shows. It was like, how do you take this fandom around Comic-Con and apply it to sneaker culture or apply it to whatever else. They own the biggest video game shows, all these things.
So they're logistics experts, basically.
Logistics experts, but really fan culture experts. They build in real life experiences around these really rabid fan bases. They did it for the UFC. They did it for Disney and Star Wars. They did it for Comic-Con. They did it for PAX and video games. They've replicated this multiple times. So I saw we could take their knowledge around building these type of events, my knowledge and brand connections of street culture and the Complex brand, and let's put this brain trust together and let's go out and create ComplexCon. And Complex got on board. Mark then was the genius who then, my idea was, I think right there, Mark said, hey, let me make a couple phone calls and see if we can level this up. And then Mark echoes like, hey, I know Takashi Murakami and I know Pharrell. And he pulled in these even bigger icons to come and like elevate this to a whole new level.
That was Murakami had that immersive experience the first year, right?
He was the art director of the experience the first year.
It's crazy. So when this got released and I went the first year, and right when I got in there, it was the first time I ever felt that I was inside of Instagram. It was almost like I was in a real life experience in a social platform. And it was very wild because I think it was, once I left, it was almost like the world kept going inside of Instagram, and being in there was just crazy. So talk to me about how important Instagram was in the success of ComplexCon.
So the initial tagline, Mark Echo credit, for ComplexCon was to bring the internet in real life, right?
Exactly, yeah.
As URL to IRL. So, as we were moving 2015, as we're conceptualizing event 2016, when we launched it, like Instagram was it, right? And you see all these like glossy curated moments. So it's like, how do we aggregate the internet in real life and bring together everything you're seeing all into one place? Because as we get more disconnected in this digital social world, right? We're all seeing this stuff, but it becomes almost like numbing or dull, right? Like, how do you actually like be in line at a micro union pop-up shop and like Pharrell's over there and Takashi Murakami's here and Offset is here, and like
it was like Tron. It was like literally, I felt like it was inside of like the platform.
What's that movie,
itself.
Ready Player One? There's like the street culture version of Ready Player One, right? And I think like that was so important to like bring everything together, not just sneakers, but like art, music, fashion, other stuff, food, entrepreneurialism. Gary Vee's speaking. I mean, it's like, how do you put this all together? It's like your Instagram feed and like everyone showed up at once, which is almost impossible to get that many important people in one place at one time, right? I don't know if I answered the question correctly, but yeah.
No, it was just it was such a weird experience. It was something like I've never felt before, and that's why I knew like this is it. Like, this is gonna stay.
It was surreal. It was a monumental achievement. It's something that I was so proud of, that the Complex team, everyone, it was an aggregation of like hundreds of years of relationships and goodwill, and everyone called in the favor for one moment in time and said, will you come to this place at this time? Nike and Adidas in the same room at the same time. Like, just shit like that doesn't happen. You know what I mean? And like, it was a really, really special thing to pull off that I think is hard even for ComplexCon to continue to generate, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct me if I'm wrong. Were you not... You couldn't buy stuff at Agenda and then a ComplexCon. Was that the first time that you guys
Agenda
were selling?
was all B2B wholesale, right? Yeah. I always had aspiration to turn Agenda into a festival, which I did later, but I didn't think Agenda had the top level consumer facing demand to get there, right? So I basically was like, hey, let's take the idea and the relationship we have with the brands, but then we need a partner like a Complex or like a Hypebeast or someone who has that consumer affinity, because we were always industry facing. So we had brand relationships and media relationships and talent relationships, but we ultimately didn't have a connectivity to the kid because we were a B2B platform.
Makes sense.
Now later on, Agenda did launch a music festival called Agenda Festival my last year that I was there that was successful. And it was more like, do you guys know the Warped Tour? Yeah. I thought Agenda Festival was more like the updated version of the Warped Tour. So the music at Agenda Festival first year was like Billie Eilish, Brockhampton, Tyler the Creator, A$AP Rocky. It had more of an indie, younger vibe, and it was more action sports led and less hip hop and sneaker culture. So we saw a delineation between what Agenda Festival could have been and what ComplexCon was. So ultimately similar format where consumers can come in and buy and engage directly with their favorite musicians and brands, but just a different ideology. How
important has celebrity been in this whole entire thing? Because for me, when I think of Agenda, I think of just meeting like a ton of my favorite rappers just walking around.
Yeah, it became important in the later years as we started off kind of like indie streetwear brands that were like graphic design driven, and over time the skaters became important, and then towards the end it was like what our currency, our our value was what rappers were walking around at the show, right? And there was one year we had like everyone you can imagine, Travis Scott, Rick Ross, Pharrell, and it was like that to me felt like when Agenda was in Vegas, it was like at its biggest and most important. And like as the rappers stopped coming, I felt like then the brand stopped investing less. So much is put on the talent. Even with ComplexCon, what talent is there becomes so important, which is such a hard thing to control when you're not paying them to come. So it became very important, but much to my dismay, I think, because it's unfortunate that the talent stopping through would dictate the success of the event.
Well, I think then you have these these exclusive drops. So to combat, like if celebrities don't come, now we have these exclusive drops is like almost like a backup. So now you have all these things coming together, and I think that's what made it explosive.
It's all interconnected though. So like, I think as you see decentralization of talent coming, the brands then see that and they'll stop doing many exclusive drops. And even like Nike at year 2 in ComplexCon, they brought Kendrick and Kobe, right? Like the brands sometimes are bringing the biggest ones and in conjunction with their drops. So it's all kind of an interconnected ecosystem as you see brands in a space race to sign talent, right? You know, between Adidas and Nike, who's signing which rapper, who's doing this, right? So it's all kind of one incestuous interconnected ecosystem that like, you know, it's not decoupled. It's right intertwined with each other.
I think that was the biggest cheat code you have is they were footing the bill. I remember that when we had a booth, we were paying people to come, bring them out to the club, and you were basically just piggybacking off the brands bringing the people.
I look at it as you got to aggregate the power of the brands and all their endorsement agreements and their network. These brands are spending millions of dollars, sometimes maybe hundreds of millions of dollars on talent deals. They're looking for unique ways to leverage the talent, whether it's on digital platforms or in real life platforms. So it's like, hey, for ComplexCon, it's like, hey, do you want to go send this person at Foot Locker at Hollywood and Highland and sign autographs or something? Or do you want to come into this event where you're like going to get like 10x the exposure and digital amplification and all these things? Maybe we're going to cut out Foot Locker. But you get the idea, right? Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely. It's like we got to do a judo move. Other people have the power, and how do we convince them to like send that power our direction?
All right, so let's talk about the transition from the B2B to direct to consumer.
Yeah.
Because from a trade show perspective, it was Agenda, then it was ComplexCon, and now I've seen, you know, with NTWRK and with, you know, some brands that you've invested in, it looks like that you're putting a lot of your eggs in the direct to consumer basket. So let's just talk about that transition.
Yeah.
And where you see everything going.
Yeah, so, you know.
Is brick and mortar dead?
Absolutely not. It's still, whatever, 90 or 80 something % of all retail, right? So brick and mortar is not dead. It is changing. I think someone said the tipping point is when e-commerce gets over 20% of the gross of all retail sales is when you're going to start to see a real decline. But I think it is changing. For me, you know, I've always been continually trying to do different things as I progress. So, you know, we haven't talked about a lot of them, but obviously I started in graphic design and web and then clothing brands and trade shows and, you know, consumer shows, always continually moving, right? Like, you know, think of myself like a shark. Like I have to keep moving or I'll die, right? And along the way, through being successful and making some money from Agenda, I've always then taken a lot of those winnings and put them into a handful of different companies. I was always interested in stuff in the consumer CPG space, direct to consumer, other stuff. So along the way, I've invested and advised like probably 15 different companies,
15
even while I was doing Agenda. So, and a lot of guys who I met through Agenda. I put money into and advised a company called the Barracks, which is like a digital media company, if you know those guys.
Skate.
Yeah, exactly. So like that was like my foray into like learning digital media business. Then I had a relationship with P-Rod and the guys from Primitive. I helped them with their brand and another business that I had run that we didn't talk about, and I had a relationship with them, and they were launching a beer company called St. Archer, and they came to me, and the very first thing, I put money into that in the seed round, and St. Archer sold to Miller Coors for a lot of money, right? Like
that was the one that you guys aggregated a bunch of skaters that put in money?
It was basically like the first action sports driven kind of like lifestyle beer company, right? So it's a microbrew that had like the front end look of like a Ruka, right? And had this like real lifestyle approach. The beer was amazing, but like the marketing was more innovative. It was like Eric Costin and the best snowboarders and the best skaters. And I'd gotten involved with them early, and they had an amazing product, an amazing team, but I saw the power of that brand, and you could read about it online. I think someone said they exited for over 100 million. So, you know, that was my first foray into like, okay, beverage CPG. I was like, this is amazing. Then I got involved with a couple of cold pressed juice companies. One called Pressed Juice here in LA I invested in early on. One called Juice Served Here, which eventually went out of business, but was like a really great brand. You ever seen them, Juice Served Here? amazing cold pressed juice brand. So I was getting involved in a lot of these different companies, and then I got involved with a towel company called Slow Tide. Are you familiar with them?
Not.
You should check them out. They're almost like Stance socks for beach towels. You guys should do a collaboration with them. Putting some of your art on the towels would be amazing.
I like that.
So finding these companies and these entrepreneurs through my network of people in Agenda that I could help accelerate what they were doing with my capital and my access. So, I did a handful of that as a backseat, like minority or, advisory stuff. So got my feet wet there. And then as I decided to, as my earnout was over and I was looking for my next thing, I got involved, looking at, the DTC space. So kind of all within the same time, when I was leaving running Agenda and ComplexCon, all that stuff, I kind of got involved with 3 new companies simultaneously. So met Nick and Nick, the founders of Truff, over a conversation with John Buscemi. We were having dinner in Malibu, and I told him that I was trying to start a hot sauce company, something a passion of mine. And he's like, "Oh, you got to meet my CEO's son. He's trying to start a hot sauce company." I meet these 2, bright-eyed kids who I think one was worked at a staffing firm, was Uber driving, and the other was
He was a waiter.
He was a waiter at Katsuya,
Yeah.
or even he's only a busboy at Katsuya, right? And these guys were so enthusiastic, and we just hit it off right away. And it really came down to they had lots of time and no money, and I had money and no time. And it was like, hey, I'm like, instead of me trying to do something I couldn't focus, I'm like, I'm gonna give these guys my money, and me and John and Andy would get behind those guys' dream, which obviously turned out to be a hugely successful company. And
At Sauce on Instagram.
At Sauce, murdering it, Nick and Nick killing it.
Let's pause for a second before we get into
Yeah.
this. Eventually, I think we're going to get into network here.
Yeah.
What do you look for in these investments? What do you look for in these entrepreneurs? What's your checklist?
I don't really have one. I'm my own family office, if you will, right? Like, so I don't have an investment manager. I don't have a thesis. I don't have an analyst. I don't have a category. I don't have a check size. I'm agnostic. I'm just usually look for like, do I think it's a good idea? And I've been wrong plenty of times, and I've lost millions of dollars investing in bad companies, literally. And I just kind of go for like what I think is good. And even I've made the same mistake many times where I like, hey, next time I'm like, I'll be more buttoned up and I'll look at their P&L, I'll ask them more questions and I'll do more diligence. And like every time I just kind of go back to my gut. And I've won more than I've lost. And I just it's about people, it's about the idea, and it's about do I think I can use my network of people, no pun intended, to help them, whether through introduction or through commercial agreements or whatever. And I think that's it. It's fairly simple. So do I like the people? And usually they somehow relate to something I'm personally passionate about. So I'm a sucker for things that, whatever, it might be a horrible business, but I love fonts, right? I've got 70 books on fonts. I follow 1,000 sign painters on Instagram. Someone came to me with like a business revolving fonts or sign painting. I might invest in it for no good reason, just because I'm a sucker for it, right? So my personal interest somehow lies within those things.
I do feel like white space with you. You keep getting into these companies where it's just little white space within the markets you're in. The trade show had no lifestyle sauce. Obviously, there's no brand that's new with hot sauce.
I think the common denominator would be in businesses that I'm involved with, either operating or advising and investing in, kind of 2 common denominators. One, platforms and marketplaces. Agenda was a B2B marketplace. ComplexCon was a B2C marketplace. Network is a B2C marketplace, right? Curated, invite-only marketplaces that are, when someone has the whole internet or the whole trade show world or the whole market, how do you boil it down into a curated marketplace in a specific market or industry? That seems to be something I've been successful with over and over again when businesses I personally operate. And other businesses is like, hey, how is there some large market that's out there? It's not a new or revolutionary idea, whether it's hot sauce or whatever, or beer, or these things that I gravitate to where, big, huge companies control it. And the same idea even with Agenda and ASR. Some big company does something really mass. Who's going to come in and do something specialized and speak to a smaller audience and do it cooler, and that actually gives you the opportunity to get big really fast. And you've seen that in like soap. Those guys did Method Soap, or like Diddy with Ciroc. Like, how do you come in and put a cultural relevant twist on some massive market, speak to a direct audience, and then that can actually help you grow? So those are semi, understood constructs that apply to a lot of investing, but I think I've done good with those 2 ideas.
Seems like you have a pretty good equation there without thinking you have an equation there.
Yeah, but sometimes I don't think about it when I'm doing it. It's my natural inclination to gravitate towards that.
So let's talk about network. That's
Yeah.
the big thing in your platter right now. What is there for everybody that's
Network is a new company that I'm CEO of, and Network, for lack of a better elevator pitch, is what QVC or HSN was to our parents' generation. Video or home shopping television for a mobile-first Gen Z millennial audience with culturally relevant products. So if QVC or HSN is Kathy Lee Gifford selling a sweater on TV at midnight to some person in Minnesota who's 65 years old who's ordering over the telephone, we're selling a DJ Khaled's headphone or a LeBron James sneaker through mobile live streaming video in-app purchase with native commerce, right? We're still putting a personality in a product in a video shoppable environment and telling a story, but the way we're curating that and delivering it on a technology spectrum is vastly different. And every day we do exclusive drops.
It's every day now.
Every day, we're now sometimes twice a day. So we first started once a week. We're dropping a new exclusive product at least once to twice a day, every single day, around these appointment-based times. So like you tune in at like, let's say 6 p.m. PST, and you have the opportunity to buy this exclusive thing and usually hear a story, see an original piece of content. So it's like a blending of content and retail all happening at once.
Love it. Where do you see that going in a year to 5 years?
We started off very heavily in spaces where we had great relationships, sneakers, streetwear, art, but then it's gone into food, it's gone into esports and gaming, working with FaZe Clan, right? So we really want to be an aggregator for all things youth culture, pop culture. And the analogy I want to give is we aspire to build a brand like HBO. And what I mean by that is HBO is an amazing brand that's known for putting out amazing quality. But if you actually look to the through line of the type of content they put out, it's all over the place. It's Game of Thrones, it's Girls, it's Vice News, it's all these things. You may go to HBO once or twice a week to catch something you love. I love HBO. I've been watching it for 30 years. I've never seen an episode of Game of Thrones ever once in my life, but I still love HBO. So how do we build this aggregator where we can still be, like, network can move into beauty, we can move into food, we can move into things that are vastly different from where we started, which is like street culture, men's street culture and fashion, and eventually we can be in women's beauty and it doesn't offend the other audience, right? So we want to aggregate the best moments and best brands and highest quality products and best talent in all of pop culture, youth culture into this one platform. And much like ComplexCon and what Network will be, it's an agnostic vessel for aggregation of influence. So how do we just aggregate anything? And we have no rules. We're a retail company that works with other retailers. We're a media brand that works with other media brands, right? Anyone that has influence or something interesting, we want to get onto this platform or marketplace.
Love it. So you definitely have access, but if you had to pick one dream collaboration for Network, whether it be a human on there or a brand, who would it be? And for context too, why don't you tell everybody who your partners are with that?
You might know a couple of them.
Yeah, so Network went out to raise money in April of 2018. We're lucky enough to have Jimmy Iovine as our lead investor and great advisor to the business, super helpful. He also has a private equity fund with some of his friends called Main Street Enterprises, whose investors include people like LeBron James and Mav Carter and Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Tom Warner owns the Boston Red Sox and Liverpool Soccer Club. So getting all those guys in to lead our seed financing was tremendous, not just because of the capital we raised, but those guys are actually all helping us, right? Picking up the phone. And I think that's the unique variable with getting people like that to help you is some companies list fancy celebrity investors on their cap table where they actually pick up the phone for you, right?
Shout out Gary Vaynerchuk. Love you.
Yeah.
Great partner.
There you go. But there's some people, so there's someone out here who's toting some name on their cap table in a press release, but are they really picking up the phone? And I think that's what you need. And then recently we raised our second round of financing from Foot Locker and Live Nation. So we got some great corporations, some great individuals, and ultimately, no traditional financial investors or VCs. It's all been about strategic people who can help the business in some direct way.
Live Nation, fucking beast. So who's that dream collab? Got to give us one. There's got to be someone.
We're about to do, I think one of our dream collabs, we're doing a Billie Eilish is about to drop something on a Cyber Monday with Network.
She has the craziest fans.
Yeah, so Billie is the next biggest superstar in the world. It's already happening, but she's going to be like the next Lady Gaga, Madonna level of fame, Michael Jackson, whatever, right? She's a fucking star. So we're excited about some of the stuff we're doing with Billie Eilish. And other stuff like you got cause on the table. Like one day we could do some cause stuff, right? But for us, it's about not like us going to those people. Hopefully one day we build a platform that they'll organically want to come to us, and I think that's more what I'm excited about than like trying to just call some obscure shot in the air. Yeah.
Patience. All right. So last question before we get into the piece.
Yeah.
2 entrepreneurs you look up to and why?
Jimmy Iovine, for sure. I looked up to him before I met him. Now I've got to spend some significant time with him. He's a real genius. Again, one of those people that sees around corners. He's not entrenched in traditional CEO mindset of thinking about P&Ls and margins and this, and he understands all that, but he's off of energy, off of people, off of ideas, and even goes into a lot of non-traditional spaces. So I think I've learned so much over the last 2 years getting to just be around him and listen, and beyond everything, an amazing person, so nice, so empathetic, and just so helpful and so genuine. I aspire to be 1/10 as successful as he is and maintain that level of humility. And still every day is about helping people, helping his friends, helping his family. He just helps people and doesn't, he's done well enough where it doesn't need to be anything in it for him. So I think that's great. And Mark Echo, again, these are people that I've been lucky enough to work with and collaborate with, but still going back to someone who's my childhood idol. Now I get to work with him and have him as a continual mentor for me personally and professionally. The guy's done amazing, and he's turned a passion of graffiti into a multi-billion-dollar company. And now the thing I look up to him for is now he's quit Complex, quit this for-profit world, and working largely in the nonprofit world running.
Didn't even know that.
Yeah, he's working at a XQ, which is Lorene Powell Jobs, who's Steve Jobs' widow, her foundation called Emerson. And they have this XQ, which is basically trying to change the future of education, right? And the short pitch for them is you see every other business and industry innovating, digitalizing, you name anything, right? From food to whatever, right? School is the same. You walk in, you sit at a wooden desk, the teacher stands in front with a chalkboard. It hasn't changed in 100 years. They're trying to revolutionize the future of education and change the way we learn in this country. And they're building high schools for inner city kids and putting them through college and doing all this stuff. And he's doing amazing work there and taking what was his, street culture upbringing and business entrepreneurship and applying it to education. And I myself, believe very much in I've got a few chapters in my career, and I would like my next chapter or two to be philanthropically led. And I don't want to just help people sell T-shirts and shoes for the rest of my life. And as much as that's done well for me, I know it's a pretty empty existence in the long term. So I aspire to do what Mark is doing one day.
Legend. Peace. Turn around. Why'd you pick it? We have a lot of pieces to pick from here. You picked through hundreds of pieces. This is the one you picked. What does it mean to you?
Something that I'm trying to learn as I get older and wiser, and I'm learning and failing every day, is that I unfortunately spent the last 20 years working, and I didn't look up a lot. And there's that Ferris Bueller, if you don't stop look every once around, every while, life could pass you by, right? And I very much have lived that, right? I'm not saying I've lived a deprived life, but I was just working, and I had some great experiences at work, but I didn't take advantage of the wealth that I've accumulated and the freedom and even being my own boss to actually I didn't go to Japan. I had an office in Japan for 5 years. I went to Japan for my first time 2 weeks ago, right? I'm just now getting this mindset, I gotta go because I'm cognizant of my own mortality and life, that when I die, it isn't gonna be the shit that I accumulated or the house or the car or the whatever. All that shit is empty and vapid, and the experience is super important, and it is an important narrative that I'm trying to live up to. And every day I have to remind myself, stop, breathe, plan to go somewhere, to do something. And more often now, where I always shied away from doing things. No, I got to work. I always had some impending event coming up. The trade show's coming up. I can't go. Or Complex Con's coming up. And I just stay at home and work. I'm no, fuck that. I'm finally in a business, and why I'm in this DTC business, we had to fight the war every day in little bits. When I was in the event business, it always was this one impeding moment. If that moment didn't do good, my whole year was fucked. So I always felt like I was waiting for the moment. Now, every day is just a little bit of a war. So now I can finally step back and go, okay, I want to go to Japan. I want to go to Italy. I want to go to this conference. I went to South by Southwest for my first time last year. It's just all these things that I never did, and I'm finally getting to do because I finally stepped back. And if anything's important to me, it's traveling and experiences, and everything else is completely unimportant and decentralized on my list of things to do.
That was perfect, man.
This sounds like a similar life problem that we have.
Yeah, we have the same problem.
Yeah.
But we're not quite on that level.
You're a little ahead of us. We just were in Hawaii and had this epiphany. We're actually pre-planning going to 4 countries next year. We're leveraging work with it. We're still not fully work-life balance, but at least we're starting. So
that's
so many gems, man. I appreciate it. Where can everybody find you?
At NTWRK. NTWRK on Instagram, and I don't really have any personal social media, so I'm quite boring, and I haven't been traveling anywhere. Maybe one day I'll travel blogs in my future.
My man, thank you, bro.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys.
My man.